Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Caden and I just want to say welcome to church. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know about our Sunday morning service. So if you're ever in our area, we would love for you to come and worship with us. I'm excited for you to hear today's message, so let's jump right in.
You know, this series is just electrifying me. I don't know what it's doing for you guys. We got into that time and season series, and I came to realize that God was setting up a whole series on time and seasons, or a season I'd be going through that was going to be unique and difficult and rewarding all in the same. And then last week God said, okay, we're changing. Instead of talking about the time, we're talking about what it's time for. And he gave me the series title called, It's Time to Fight. And if you weren't here last week, I went on and on for about 30 minutes on how much I don't like fighting, so you should just go watch it online. But not all of us are fighters, right? And fighting is tough sometimes, and fighting is difficult and hard, and even the word fight is a little bit threatening in itself. I would prefer to never have to fight for anything. But what God's been showing me for myself and for our church is that sometimes the thing that you want the most is on the other side of the fight. And it might be a fight worth having to get to where God's trying to take us. And so we've been talking about fighting. And to accomplish the things that God has called for us, we're gonna have to fight. Everybody say, I'm gonna have to fight. All right, now y'all are with me. That's what I've been telling myself, that I'm gonna have to fight. I'm gonna have to fight for the things that God has called me to. I'm gonna have to fight for my family. I'm gonna have to fight for my church. I'm gonna have to fight. And there's always a fight coming to us. But there is this fight that we talked about last week, which is the most important fight we will ever fight. And that is the fight for our faith. And here's what the Word of God says in 1 Timothy 6. It says to fight the good fight of faith. And right there it's saying that a good fight shows me that sometimes there's some bad fights, right? And so here Paul is, and he has to have the word, the good fight, because sometimes we get crossways on what the good fight is. But here Paul is, and he says to fight the good fight of faith. Lay hold on eternal life to which you were called. That's the fight that we're called to. That good fight, that fight for our faith. Sometimes that fight looks like the faith to trust God again. Sometimes that faith looks like a fight to get up again. Sometimes that fight looks like the fight just to dream again. Sometimes that fight looks like the faith to just, no matter what comes against me, no matter what, I'm going to get up and go. That's the good fight of faith. The fight that believes in the faith of God's goodness. The fight that believes and has faith in God's faithfulness and goodness, and that He's always going to come through, no matter what's going on around me, but God. That's the fight we talked about last week, that good fight of faith. And we talked about Paul here, and he was coming to the end of his life, and it was sort of a reflection. And I used this scripture to talk about Paul saying, there is a fight because I just got done fighting it. He said, I have fought the good fight of faith. He says, I have fought an excellent fight, and I have finished my full course with all my might, and I have kept my heart full of faith. There's a crown of righteousness waiting in heaven for me. And last week I talked about this being a reflection of Paul and his life that he was telling to Timothy. But as this week went by, I realized it wasn't just a reflection of his life as much as it was an exhortation to Timothy, saying, Timothy, do like me. Fight hard. Timothy, do like me. Don't lay down. You gotta get back up. Timothy, do like me. Run your race. Man, run your life to the fullest of your life. When you get to the end, you turn around and you go, I ran my race, and I fought that good fight of faith, and it was an excellent fight, and I never stopped fighting. And so here he is, he's trying to get Timothy pepped up. It's like a pep talk for Timothy. It's like, hey, Timothy, I feel like I'm gonna die soon, but here's the good news. I thought, well, I'm passing this baton to you. Timothy, this is your fight now. Timothy, fight hard. Timothy, don't let life knock you down. Timothy, when it does, because it will, just get back up. That's how you fight. And that's what led me to today's message. I feel like if it was 2021, well, it is, and if Paul was here today, what Paul would say to Timothy is, Timothy, don't you dare tap out. And that's the title for today's message. Don't you dare tap out. maybe is a new term for some of you, but I'm a fighting specialist now. I've watched some Rocky clips. I have watched all the Karate Kids and Cobra Kai season 1 and 2. Maybe 3 if there's a 3 now. 1 and 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3. Watched all of that. I have watched some UFC. I told you that about last week. I told you about that. And I have a fighting daughter now. And last night I actually watched robots fight, which was very interesting. And I don't know why it gave me such stress, but it did. These robots were pounding each other. So now that I'm a fighting expert, I feel like the word tap out was something I wanted to use in today's message. Don't you dare tap out. And let me tell you what tap out is. It's a UFC mixed martial arts term. And to tap the floor means to show that you accept that your competitor has beaten you. This act will immediately end the fight, and the opponent is then rewarded the victory. So now you see why Paul, if he was here today, would say to us, don't you dare tap out. Don't you dare surrender to what the enemy's trying to do here. Don't you dare give up the fight and give that victory to someone else. That victory is your victory. Don't you dare tap out. And I was thinking about today, why is it that people quit just so easy? I feel like we're kind of learning to be quitters. And I know there's situations that are difficult and tough and situations that you got to get out of. But I think we've kind of taken that and now we kind of use that for any situation we just don't like, right? This is hard, so I'm going to just quit, right? Or this is boring, so I'm going to quit. I'm just not having fun anymore. You know, this marriage just isn't really fun. Right? And so we just quit. We enroll our kids in sports and they play a game or two, and when it's hard and maybe they didn't score the winning goal today, it's okay, we'll just quit. Right? We've learned how to be really good quitters. Our society has taught us the technique of the tap out. Every time life gets too hard, you just tap out. And I'm not trying to downplay the severity of certain situations in people's lives, and there's some very difficult things. I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about the things, you know the things. You could be tougher. You could have a little more grit. You could have a little bit more fight, but nowadays it's just easy just to tap out. And quitting's just kind of the normal thing. In fact, quitting's the cool thing to do. You're kind of a hero if you quit, right? The courage it took to quit, you know, like, right? And again, not extreme situations. I'm talking about the dumb stuff. You know, the stuff that we just are losing our grit for and our fight for, right? Just the hard things, the boring things, the things that aren't real easy. We just throw in the towel and we quit. And I'm going to be real honest with you guys. You know, we talk about fighting in the ring, and sometimes we get slapped around just a little bit, and so we tap out. Let me tell you guys what I look like in the ring. See, I walk into the ring, you don't even have to hit me. I'm just like, I tap. Like nothing even happened yet. Why are you tapping? I'm tapping because it looks like it's going to be hard. It hasn't even been hard yet, but I'm anticipating some difficulty here. So I'm going to do a pre-tap. Can we do a pre-tap? I'm going to be honest with you guys. That's why I'm preaching this. I'm trying to work myself through this because I'm realizing to do what God has called me to do with my life, I can't ever tap. I got to get in the ring and I got to fight my full fight, an excellent fight, that's a good fight of faith, that fight that I can be proud of and go, hey, next generation, next guy, grab this baton and you keep running your race because we're at a fight and we're fighting an excellent fight and we're fighting an important fight. And so we can't fight a fight that we're going to quit, but we also got to fight a fight and realize we're fighting one. I think that's something that the enemy's done that's so clever. One of the most clever things he's ever done is to convince you there isn't an enemy. There isn't a fight. There isn't a fight. This is just normal. Your life and your circumstances, and the things that are just happening to you, well, what are you going to do about it? There's nothing you can do about it because it's just life. So the first thing the enemy does, he convinces us that there's not even a fight. We're just comfortable and we're casual, and when things happen, we just roll with it. Must be meant to be, right? There's no fight at hand. And that's his best play. And if he can't convince you that there isn't a fight, he gets you distracted in the wrong fight. That fight is a person. is an idea. That fight is this, that fight is that. But he forgets to tell you that fight is him. And that's what the Apostle Paul says. He says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. It's not each other that we're fighting. It's not our politics and our government and all these things. There's an enemy that we're fighting. It says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the rulers of darkness. Guys, we're in a fight. There's an enemy that's coming after your family. There's an enemy that's coming after your life and your health. There's an enemy that's coming against your mindset. There's an enemy that wants you to tap out. And he's coming with whatever he can bring to convince you, you gotta tap out. And I think fight after fight after fight, and we just keep going through these situations, some of us begin to tap out on ourselves. The fight's no longer even with someone, the fight becomes with ourselves. We turn on ourselves and we begin to hate ourselves. We turn on ourselves and we begin to have shame and disappointment and frustration. Maybe we can look out and we can see the good in the rest of the world, but the enemy's convinced us that the fight is ourself. You ever seen those things about a dog when they chase its own tail trying to bite it? Sometimes that's what the enemy does to us. He gets us chasing our own tail, attacking ourselves. Or even worse than that, gets us to turn on God. And the person that's given us the goodness and the faithfulness and life, and we see his evidence everywhere, all of a sudden we're so blocked in our viewpoint, we can't see his goodness anywhere. So that's what the enemy does. He tries to convince us that we're not in a fight. He tries to convince us that if we are in a fight, he gets us all confused on what the right fight is. And I've been watching all my fighting shows now, and I've realized there's some things that a fighter must do to do his fight well. And one of those things is that a fighter knows who they are fighting. Church, we have to know who our fight is against. It's not your spouse. It's not your mother-in-law. It's not that crazy neighbor, right? That's not your fight. Your fight is the enemy. And your fight is coming at you. So first off, you got to know who you're fighting. But secondly, the secret to a fighter is the faith that they possess. Fighters, good fighters, have a faith inside them. Good fighters have this faith that they hold on to, those moments when they feel like tapping out. I've never been in a ring. I've never even been in an actual physical fight. That might make you think less of me, but I haven't, okay? I don't have a lot of experience here, but I have imagination. And I can imagine being in a ring and getting popped in the mouth just one time, and I can feel the blood oozing down. Maybe at this point I have the big cauliflower ears because they've been hit so many times, right? I can imagine what this is like, and it wouldn't take me but a couple hits in the mouth that I'd be considering the tap out. I'd be considering whatever I could do as quickly as I can do to get out of this situation. Even if that situation meant giving up the victory. Even if that situation meant I'm gonna lay down that belt or lay down that crown for later because I just want to be okay right now. And I would strongly consider that tap out. But that's something that the fighters all have. It's like the tap out idea, the quit idea is off the table. And how can they get the confidence to take that off the table? Well, it comes from a confidence inside of themselves. It comes from a faith. And what fighters have is they have this strong faith. And here's what the faith is that they have. They have first off, they have the faith that they know their opponent well. They know their opponent's attack, they know their opponent's tactics, and it's not going to catch them off guard because they're ready for this, they know what to expect. Another thing that gives a great fighter some faith is that they know that they have trained for this. They've put the work in. They know how to respond to every single thing that their opponent or their enemy throws at them. They know how to respond. And it's no longer just a mindset, it's now a habit because they've trained so very well. Another thing, a fighter that gives them confidence and gives them faith is because anytime they get rocky, they just look over in their corner. And they know who's in their corner. They know who's supporting them. They know who's speaking into them and the life that they're giving them. That's what a good fighter knows. A good fighter knows that deep down inside, he was made for this fight. You know, you go watch fighter interviews and you go, when did you get into this? And they go, I've always been this. Since I was a kid, this was just in me. I was just born a fighter. They don't sound like Pastor Steph, like, oh, I don't really like getting hit, and I decided to join this because, I don't know, I think it would be good for me. They don't say that. They go, I'm a fighter. This is who I am, right? I'm made for this fight. Another thing these good fighters know is that faith that comes in them knowing that the odds are in their favor. And that's what's funny to me about faith. We all actually use our faith every single day. Sometimes we just use our faith in the wrong direction. Right? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, the things that we don't even see and we don't know. So why is it that we use our faith to go, you know what? I'm gonna lose my job next week. I just know it. That was that promotion. Every time they miss me, you know what? Next week I'm probably gonna lose my job. If not, I'll get demoted. He's gonna be my boss now. You know what else? My kids, they're gonna be bad. Well, they're only 2. Yeah, I know it. But I was bad. They're gonna be bad. Everything's gonna be bad. Okay? My marriage, we're getting divorced. Statistically speaking, all Americans do. We're doing it. He's gonna cheat. All men cheat. Right? Like, that's still faith. It's just faith in the wrong direction. But see, a good fighter puts their faith in the right direction. They don't go, the odds are against me. They go, the odds are for me. The odds are in my favor. That's how this fight's fixing to go down. These fighters, they've got some grit. These fighters know what they're doing, and they have this special grit. What they have is a special faith. They don't have a special circumstance. They have a special type of faith. A special faith in who they are. It's a special faith, and that's the thing. These winning fighters, these good fighters don't have special circumstances. They have special faith that pushes them through. And then there was a study that they did about people that were successful in life. People that you would look at and you would say that these people are successful, these people are fighters. And what they said about these people is that the number one precursor to success is not your circumstances or your resources. Instead, the number one precursor to success is your ability to get up and continue to fight. That's the number one precursor. And when you look at successful people all over the world, that is it. They just didn't quit fighting. They continued to get back up. And that's the difference between the ones who win the fight and the ones who don't win the fight. The ones that win are just people that have gotten up. Time and time again, you just can't knock them down. They just keep getting back up. Those are the people that won the fight. It's the people that don't get knocked down or do get knocked down and then go, I'm getting right back up. I don't care if I get knocked down 100 times. I may lose this fight. I may lose this round. I may lose this match, but I'm still getting in this ring and I'm going to continue to fight. Those are your winners. Those are the ones that have the grit for the fight and you're here to fight. And last week we talked about the woman with the issue of blood. That woman that would just grab a hold and reach out and touch the hem of Jesus's garment. And my Bible doesn't say this, but I have an idea. If there was a woman who had an issue of blood for 12 years, I don't think her life would be normal. Right? If we suffer from a cold for a few weeks, our life isn't normal. It doesn't say she didn't have a job, but I would think she probably didn't have a line of work that she was in, that she could do very consistently. It seems like she would be at the mercy of this problem that she has. I would think that she'd probably by now lost her job. I'm sure by now she'd lost a lot of relationships. It doesn't say she was married. Maybe she even lost her husband. Maybe she had lost so much because of this situation, this circumstance, that she had lost so much. And you know, she may have lost her blood, but you know what her idea was? I might have lost everything. I might even be losing the blood from my body, but what I'm not losing is this fight. I'm not losing this fight. It doesn't matter, it's been 12 years. I'm not losing this fight. I'm not tapping out. And so that day when Jesus came to town, she saw an immediate opportunity. She saw an immediate opportunity, and it wasn't an opportunity that just came on her. No, this woman was a fighter. And when she saw the opportunity, she knew how to respond. She knew if I could just get up and push through these crowds, even if I could just touch the hem of this garment, I could be healed. I could win this fight. Man, this girl had some grit. This girl had some grit for 12 years. Don't you think after battling something for 12 years, it would be just easy enough just to lay on the couch? If I'm gonna be this sick, I might as well enjoy it. Watching some good TV, eating ice cream on the couch, not even leaving the house, right? But not this woman. This woman was a fighter. This woman had grit, and she didn't give up. And I was reading this book the other day, and it was talking about a football player by the name of Bo Easton. How many of you have heard of Bo Easton? This is back. This is back when you're like 40, like Pastor James, like that way back. You might know about Bo Easton. But Bo Easton is an NFL football player, or was an NFL football player. And at the age of 9, Bo Easton had a dream. He wanted to be the best safety in the whole NFL. And there was a couple of problems with his dream. First off, statistically speaking, there's about a 0.2% chance that a high school football player will make it into the NFL. That was problem one. Problem two is that in high school, Bo Easton was 100 pounds soaking wet and only 5 foot tall. But that was Bo Easton's dream, and so when it was time to try out for the high school football team, he did. He goes and he tries out, and of course his coach doesn't allow him to make the team, and he says, football is not for you. You need to find a different thing. So that day, Bo gets home, and he's really discouraged, and of course he tells his dad, and his dad begins to tell him this story. His dad's past was that he had grown up on a ranch, and on these ranches, they would use ranch dogs. And he said ranch dogs are the most important dog or most important person on the farm. They actually can take the place of about 10 full-grown men because these ranch dogs do so much work, herding the cattle and pushing them and moving them and getting them ready to go. These ranch dogs are really important. And every few years, they'll have to have a new litter of ranch dog. Like I said, it's kind of the MVP of the property. And so he said that what happens is when a ranch dog has a new puppy litter, they take all the puppies and they line them out and they find out the one that is the smallest puppy, the runt of the litter. And they tie a ribbon around that puppy's neck. And then 12 weeks go by. And when 12 weeks come by, people come to buy all the puppies and they sell every single puppy or give every puppy away except for one puppy. The one with the ribbon around its neck. And the reason that they save that puppy there, because it says that puppy has had to work the hardest to survive. That run of the litter is going to be the smartest, the fastest, the most determined. It's not the dog that's the biggest that they want. It's the dog with the biggest heart they want. And that runt of the litter, that would be the dog that would have the biggest fight. And that's what they were willing to stake their livelihood on, the fight of the runt. The fight of the underdog, the fight of that dog that would get back up. Well, coincidentally, as you would know, Bo Easton ends up in 1984, gets drafted into the NFL, plays for the real Houston football team, the Houston Oilers. There we are. He plays for the Houston Oilers, ends up playing on the 49ers alongside Jerry Rice, and has an amazing career in football. And this is what he said. He said, I made that dog's story my story, and I have been telling myself that story ever since. Church, I want to ask you, what story are you telling yourself? What's the narrative that you've created about your fight? What do you look like in that ring? Are you outside the ring, letting somebody else do the fighting while you just watch? Are you inside the ring, sometimes like me, tapping out even if it looks like it's gonna be hard? Or are you in that ring going, no, this is me. I'm a fighter. This is my story. I get back up. No matter what it is, I fight hard. You're gonna have to paint yourself a new story, church. We gotta paint ourselves the story that we are fighters. We got to paint ourselves a story the same way Bo Easton did, that it's okay to be the underdog. Being the underdog, being the comeback kid, man, that's the fighting story worth watching. That's the fighting story worth living. That fighting story where you just get back up over and over again. And the truth is the underdog is the one with the advantage. It's not the one with the disadvantage. The disadvantaged one is the one that has everything given to him. It's the underdog, it's the fighter. He's the one with the real advantage. Because his story is a story of learning to be scrappy. His story is a story of learning to overcome odds. His story is a story of learning to have faith in something bigger than himself because he doesn't have much to have faith in. That's the story of the fighter. You've heard the saying that says it's not about the dog in the fight, but it's about the fight in the dog. I love that saying, church. What's your fight? Man, what's inside of us? Do we have that fight? And I love talking about David. Because David was an underdog. Man, he had an amazing underdog story. At 8 siblings, David was the youngest sibling, but not only was he the youngest, he was the smallest sibling. And me being the youngest and the smallest of my 8 siblings, I understand what it felt like when everyone looks at you and goes, oh, you're just so-and-so. Oh, you're just the smallest. Oh, you're just the littlest. Oh, you're just the youngest, right? So David had this fighting story. He was the youngest of 8 brothers, and all of his other brothers were warriors. All of his other brothers, they were fighters, they were warriors, they worked for King Saul, they spent time on the battlefield. All the other brothers, their dad was so proud of. But then there was David. David was just the sheep and goat watcher that hung out on the side of the hill. David was just the musician that played that harp thing. And we know about musicians, right? I was waiting for a laugh from the musicians, but they're giving me nods. Right? David, he's the underdog in this story. And so when David was just a boy, here comes the prophet Samuel, and he's coming to anoint the next king. And he meets David's father, Jesse, and he says, I want to meet your sons. I'm here on behalf of God. So Jesse begins lining up his sons, one after the other, from the strongest to the bravest to the most courageous, to the ones that look like they would have the best package, right? The real fighters. And each one Samuel would go to, and he'd go, this is the one I can tell. And God say, no, that's not the one. He said, because the thing is that man looks on the outside of things, but God looks at people by their hearts. He's looking for those people with the hearts, with the faith to fight. With those people that have to fight the good fight of faith and only know how to fight it inside because their circumstances around them aren't allowing them to fight. They got to fight within. That's the kind of fighter that God's looking for. So when David's just a boy, he gets anointed to be king, and he wouldn't actually be king for years. I think there's so much to learn even in that moment right there. I think we live in a world where we want this instant gratification, this instant promotion, and just because God promised us something, we think that it means tomorrow or he was a liar. And instead, he makes this promise to David. He says, I'm telling you this to give you faith for the fight. I'm telling you you'll be king because when you get knocked down, you got to know what the promise is that lies ahead. And so David would be called to be king, but it wouldn't be years later until David would become king. Instead, David has to learn how to fight. He has to learn how to fight on that hillside against the lions and the bears. He has to learn to fight against Goliath. Man, this giant that would maybe be the best fight of his life, the most important fight of his life. Goliath is this giant. It said he was 9'6" or maybe even more tall. He wore 125 pounds of bronze armor. I've never seen a 9-foot tall man, but I can imagine how overwhelming that would be to know you would be fighting against this giant. In fact, it said that this giant was not only big, not only was he covered in this armor, but every day this giant would come out and he would taunt them. For 40 days, the Bible says that Goliath would come out and taunt the Israelites. It used the word that he strutted. For 40 days, this giant would strut in front of them and would torment them. I don't know if you guys fight any giants in your life, but that's kind of what it seems like. It seems like when we're going up against something, nighttime might come and there might be some rest, but it's almost like as soon as you wake up in the morning, there it is again. Day after day, this fight is just in front of you. And the fight seems arrogant, it seems powerful, it seems like it's overtaking you. It seems like it's not only consuming you, but it begins to consume everybody around you. And for 40 days, the Israelites stood in fear, watching this Goliath, watching this fight, every day get up and strut. Every day get up and taunt and say, who will fight me today? So here David is, and he's just doing his thing. He's coming down to help his brothers, and along the way, he sees this giant. He sees Goliath. And he said, who is this guy? In fact, he said, who is this guy that would defy the Lord's army? He didn't look at this and go, hey, Israelites, the odds are not in your favor. He stood there and he said, the odds are in our favor because that giant is defying the Lord's army. He's defying the Lord's army. So David was an underdog, but David had a strategy. David's strategy was the strategy of faith. David said, there's some things that I got to figure out here quick, and I got to pull from what I know. And he had to pull from his faith, and he said, first off, I know I have faith in who God is. David spent years on the mountainside with God. I would challenge to say that I think David might know God more than anyone in the Bible because of the time he spent with him. He spent time with God before Jesus even came, before we were even allowed to be in the presence of God. He was spending time with God, breaking all the laws, breaking all the division that we had with our Savior. And instead, he's on a mountainside, day in and out, spending time with God. And so when the fight shows up, he's not in fear of the fight. He's in confusion. He's confused at why that Goliath thinks he could defy the Lord's army. Because he knew the power of God and he knew what God said. He knew he served an amazing God and he knew that God had never let him down. He said, I fought a lion and a bear. This is no different. I'm ready for this fight. So David had faith in who God was, but David also had faith in what he already had. That very day, Saul said, okay, kid, if you're going to fight, well, let me help you out here. Let me go and give you my armor. Let me give you my shield. Let me give you my knife. Let me give you everything that the world says that you're needing to win this fight. Instead, David goes, I don't feel comfortable in what you say I need. I feel comfortable in what God's already given me. So David goes marching out to that Goliath with a shepherd's staff and a slingshot. He had faith enough in God to trust that God had given him everything he would need to equip him for the fight ahead. So we know the story of David, right? He reaches down, he picks up 5 smooth stones, and he slays Goliath, and he knocks this giant out. Against all odds, he knocks out this giant. And the day of the fight, he said, who is this that would defy the Lord's army? See, there was something that David also knew. Not only did he know who God was, not only was he confident in what God had equipped him with, he was confident in the promises of God. And the promise of God was that this territory was territory for God's kids. This was his territory. This territory had already been marked. This territory had been chosen. And he knew this fight. He knew what his territory was. And he knew that these were God's people. Goliath was fighting against God's army. And that's all he needed to know, is that the promise of God. In church, I want to tell you that there is a promise of God for you in the territory God's given you. That family God's given to you, that is your territory, because God says it is. Your husband, your relationships, those people in your life, that's your territory. The job that he has you at right now, or the season that you're in right now, that's your territory. He wouldn't send you into something without equipping you for the fight, for the promise that he's given you. That's your territory. And David knew that. David had that confidence in that territory. So he goes and he picks up these stones and he slays this Goliath. And here's what David said. It says that David replied to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals. And the whole world will know that there is a God of Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with a sword and a spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give it to us. That's the faith for the fight. That's the faith that says, my God doesn't take any hostages. We're going all the way with this. That's the fight of my Savior. That's the fight of my God. And that's the fight that we have to have. The fight to know that we're in this fight because God said. If we're in this fight, we know that God equipped us. If we're in this fight, we know we're fighting for something that's already ours. And we walk into this ring with confidence and we say, because God said. David had this faith, man. Faith in God, faith in what he was equipped with, faith in his territory. But you know what David also had? He had faith in the giant. But it wasn't the faith in the giant that was standing in front of him. It was faith in the giant that was inside of him. He knew that the giant was actually living inside of him. Long before his years, David had a revelation that people didn't have. And the revelation was who God was. And when we partnered with God, who we were. And here's what it says way at the end of the book, years after David passed. It says, for whatever is born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. This is the victory that we overcome the world with, our faith, our mindset, our fight, our no tap out, the way that we get up. That's how we overcome. By the blood of the Lamb and by our testimony, by what he did, by what our champion did. And that champion lives on the inside of us. That's the fight. And that's what David knew. That's why David could continue to go into fights time and time again. Goliath the biggest person he would ever fight, but there would be many fights along the way. And every fight, David just would continue to get stronger. Every fight, David would just continue to get more confident, because every time he fought, he would be victorious in battle. And the next fight would come. All he had to do was look back just a little bit, and he'd say, but God. But my God is victorious. But my God will come through. But my God will do it again. Every fight just made him stronger. Every fight just made the giant that was on the inside of him even that much bigger. And that's what the enemy does. It tries to convince us that everything else outside of us is the giant. Instead of us realizing that the giant he lives on the inside of us. That's why you got to be confident that you're a fighter. You got to be confident you're a fighter. The problem isn't the problem. You're the problem's problem. You're on the scenes. The odds are in your favor. You're here to fight. You're equipped. You're strong. You're brave, because greater is he that is in you than any circumstance around you. You've got it inside you. You're equipped. You've got everything you need to live the life that God's called you to. You've got it. You just got to keep going. You just got to keep fighting. You just got to have faith for the fight. And I've been thinking a lot about this fighting thing. I've shared with you guys that about a month ago, my dad passed, and he was one of the greatest fighters I've ever known. Man, he knew how to fight. Man, there's some things that have happened in my life that have had me down, but my dad was an underdog. The underdog story in his life was crazy. And I watched my dad for years, time and time again. He would just get up and keep fighting. And that's something I feel like in the past month or so, God's been speaking to me on. If you want to win like that, you got to learn to fight like that. You got to learn that fight. The fight that never stops contending for the faith. The fight that fights the good fight, no matter what you feel like. Doesn't matter what you feel like. It matters what God says. And the word of God is so much more powerful than the feelings that we have on the inside. We keep fighting because of who he is. We keep fighting because of who we are, because of who he is. We just keep fighting. And I actually have been thinking about this message for the past few weeks, because there was a story I wanted to tell you guys. When I was a little girl, I was in the living room with my dad, and I might have shared this last week, but he watched a lot of Rocky and fighting, and he loved watching Rocky because that was the underdog story. Rocky knew how to fight. So one night we were watching boxing at the house, and there was the big guy and the little guy pit up against each other, and the big guy is just wailing on the little guy, and the little guy just keeps getting, he's bloody and he's all over the place, and the little guy gets knocked down. And you knew it was over. There's no way this kid's coming back. And so the ref or the ump or whatever the fighting police are, he begins to do the count, right? He's counting. Because you got 10 seconds, and if you don't get up, you're done for. And he's right there, and he's finishing the count, and all of a sudden, number 8, you start to see the little guy start to move. He starts to roll his shoulders, and he starts to make a move. All of a sudden, 9, 10. At 10, that little fighter jumps back to his feet and takes off running towards the big fighter. And I remember sitting there with my dad watching that, and my dad jumps up in the air, starts jumping in the living room, and he starts going, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. Church, I want that to be me. I want to be that fighter. No matter what the odds look like, no matter what the doctor says, no matter what the report is, no matter what it looks like, no matter what you've heard, inside me, I know what God says, and that's who I am, that's me. I want to be that fighter. But fighting's tough, guys. We're going to have to get some grit. And I love to say that we don't have to fight, but we do. James and I were talking last night, and he reminded me of a story at the Last Supper when Jesus is sitting with Peter. And he goes, Peter, the enemy's coming for you. Heads up. He's going to try to sift you like wheat. He's coming after you. He's coming after your calling. He's coming after your family. He's coming after your territory. He's coming. He's coming. Get ready, Peter. And he's talking to Peter, and he's going, he's coming. And here's what Jesus told Peter. He said, he's coming, get ready. And he says, but I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. That's the prayer that Jesus had for us. That our faith would not fail. And it says that when you've returned to me, to strengthen your brother. So not only that your faith wouldn't fail you, but that it would make you stronger, strong enough that you could go and strengthen those around you. That's why we fight. I think we're delusional if we think that we're gonna fight and not be tired and not be scared. No, you fight tired. You fight scared. Sometimes you fight bloody. Sometimes you fight with a broken arm, but you fight and you just keep fighting. You just keep getting up. And the truth is even if you don't wanna fight, we're still paralyzed. We're still bloody. Living in anxiety and fear and worry and frustration and living a life that you feel like you're gonna lose, I think that's worse than even getting in the ring. Is sitting outside convinced that you've already lost. Church, we gotta get in the ring. We gotta start fighting. We gotta be like David. We gotta figure out what we're equipped with. We gotta spend some time knowing who our God is so we can know what our God says. And when we know what our God says, we can know what we get to do, and what we get to say, and who we get to be. Man, we get to spend some time with God. We find ourselves and we begin to realize what we're equipped with and the things that God's already given us to fulfill the purposes of his call on our life. But you're gonna have to do it scared. You're probably gonna have to do it tired, right? But we gotta get out there and fight. It doesn't matter what your opponent thinks of you. It matters what you think of you. What do you think of you? Are you ready for that fight? Can you do it? Can you get in that ring? And you might not be responsible for the hardships that you faced. I mean, I think a lot of people go through just life just happens and things are crazy and you're not even responsible for it. But what you are responsible for is what you do with that. What do you do with what life's thrown at you? What do you do with these curveballs from the enemy? Because either way, it's gonna be tough. But man, to get back up and win that fight, man, that's the fight that God's called us to. That fight for faith, that good fight.
Wasn't that so good? Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the message today. Here at Ellis Church, we always want to give you an opportunity to be a part of what God is doing here. So, if you'd like to give, text Ellis Church to 77977, or head to our website at ellischurch.tv. Again, thank you for watching, and we'll hope you'll join us again next week.